very last minute that I have no choice but to play like your irritating sister who just rams buttons whenever she wants to and somehow always wins, I consider it a shit fight. Shao Kahn. More like Shao. And such is the way of life, from the most unfair and difficult of bosses to the absolute lowest and biggest laughing stocks of bosses. Silver the Hedgehog from Sonic 06 is one of the most classic examples of how not to do anything in a video game ever. Just look at this, it's pathetic. You'd never even know you were in a boss fight. The camera is so broken you can never focus on where you need to, you can be frozen in midair and hit whenever the game feels like it with no chance to avoid it. Sonic vanishes whenever he gets hit, and for Silver himself, he never changes his pitiful attacks of throwing stuff at you, can be beaten in around a minute if not less. And if you're really lucky, you'll be stuck over and over and over again listening to the greatest line in any video game because it makes no sense, means nothing, has no context, and is spoken like the voice actor couldn't hold in his wee-wee anymore and just let loose in his pants.
It's no use! It's no use! It's no use!
This boss though may be bad, but to be honest, it's just a nugget. A nugget of sweet corn in a poo at the bottom of a barrel within a basement of a giant poo factory. And the giant poo factory is named Sonic 06.
It's no use!
Oh, and how about the bosses that only culminate to pressing a few button prompts? I'm looking at you, Dying Light. Overall, a pretty damn good game in my opinion, but talk about one of the worst villains for this generation of games ever. Stereotypical and as hilariously bland and cliched as they come, so much that I won't even bother mentioning his name, he doesn't deserve it. But like Mr. Who Actually Gives a Shit from Assassin's Creed 2, someone who at least needs to give you a great final encounter to test your knowledge and courage, especially seeing as though you need to climb a fucking skyscraper to reach him. And after all of this, does he deliver? Nope. Does he fuck? The last moments of this puke brain's life meant so little to the dev team that it's delegated to a couple of button prompts. Button prompts that if you get wrong just mean you have to redo the long, tedious, boring, and ultimately time-wasting cutscene over and over again until you get it right. Like, I actually want to know, how did the people that make this actually think this was good? How did the team think it was acceptable for a game that was released this recently? This is just embarrassing, and especially since the plot of Dying Light drags on for the last half as it is anyway, a boss this lazy and this uncompassionate not only makes you feel pretty damn terrible for wasting your time getting this far, but also confirms exactly that the dev team also didn't give a fuck for your invested time or money into their project that they sold you, or that they give a fuck about their own created characters in this supposedly soul-driven world that they made for the sake of the video game art form. In that sense, it's one of the most depressing bosses ever, actually.
Stop looking at it too deeply.
While on the subject of QuickTime, how about instead we move over to something a lot simpler to grasp and simpler to love, Uncharted, with its rapid escapes and luscious environments, quick-fire gunfights, and Tomb Raider-esque puzzles and platforming. Okay, yes, the first game has dated by quite a while now, especially when compared to its follow-ups, but I'd still recommend a play at this if you want to get into the series. It's not essential, but a decent introduction to Nate Drake and crew. Now for some wordplay. What's the opposite of introduction? Conclusion. And does Uncharted have a great conclusion? No, it's yet another boss battle that doesn't test your knowledge, isn't fun, is over within a minute, and with a character who I can't even remember the name of, he's so badly integrated into the plot. His name is Navarro, I think, like Fallout 2? And he's a henchman to another bad guy who is also one of the most forgettable characters in the history of video games, but then turns out to not be the main bad guy after all once this Johnny appears and tries to be scary and give you a twist ending, but it's just so poorly done. And how do you fight this boss exactly? Well, unlike any other part of the game ever until this point, it begins with lots of cover shootouts where you have to stay down whenever the laser sights appear, and you can't actually hit the fucking guy you're supposed to be aiming at and who's trying to kill you directly. So yeah, that makes sense initially. You keep going through these bits until the final fight, in which you have to immediately duck or else die straight away. And if not, hide and wait for every 2 bullets fired at you before you run to the next available cover. And no matter how long it takes for him to reload his gun, you can't rush at him or he'll kill you. Then you run at him after 3 cover points and punch him in the face with more quick time prompts, lose your gun, and then without any indication that the cutscene is going to quickly change into gameplay again, you then need to run towards him again or else die in 1 hit again. But if you do that successfully, you do more quick time events and finish him off. I mean, stick my bloody fingers down the sink. This is forgettable, pointless, not satisfying, doesn't test you on anything that you learn, is totally different with no explanation, is boring, is completely random and impossible to get on your first ever attempt if you don't know what's coming up, over in a minute, and overall makes no sense at all from concept and execution. Maybe if we go back to my favorite console ever, the PS1, and also with another game by Naughty Dog, that's weird, everything will end a little bit nicer. So let's take a look at what many consider to be one of the best games on the system, Crash Bandicoot 2. I'm always going to love 3 more for many reasons, and one of those reasons are the boss fights, which when you're talking about Crash 2 aren't the worst I've ever played, but honestly just aren't that exciting and pretty easy. You'd think though, especially since Crash 1 ended with the best boss battle that the game had to offer, that Cortex would at least be worth your massive journey. And instead, what happens? You get an encounter more anticlimactic than a fart in PT. What you do in this final boss to end off a pretty great game is fly in a straight line, avoiding things in a very cramped tube, making movement pretty difficult, and spinning a cowardly Cortex 3 times before he randomly escapes to a gas hob. And that's literally it. He doesn't even attack you. I can't say any more about it. You can see how boring and lazy this fight is, and it's even more disappointing how it's at the end of the game.
You haven't seen the last of me, Crash Bandicoot!
Oh, I bloody hope so, because I want a better fight next time. Oh yeah, I got him good there. And for the last PS1 game of the list, despite this list being in no particular order at all, I actually think I have such a gripe with this last fight, and I hate it so much that I honestly think I saved the worst for me until last. Space Mama in the original Rayman. If you've seen my video on Rayman, you know how polarizing I find this game. Half of this game is some of the most bright, colourful, original, charming, and kick-ass 2D platforming I've ever played, and the other half is a cesspit of hate and unfair bullshit that isn't fun to play whatsoever. And so I'm going to paint a picture for you on the typical Rayman player that isn't a master of the game. You get through the entire beginning up until World 4. It's a challenging if comfortable journey up until World 3, Blue Mountains, where some of the most cryptic and trial and error one-hit death bullshit sections start to surface. And that's when you start losing lives fast, especially once you're on World 4, Picture City. And by the way, every time you get a game over, you lose one of your 5 continues for the entire game, and after every single death, you restart the section with 3 hit points with the weakest attack to keep you going through another bullshit part you don't have a chance to learn without losing all of your lives quicker than before and losing another continue. By the way, after each continue, you only get an extra 3 lives to work with. If you're going to say that you can just find more lives and power-ups in the stage that you're stuck on, well, no, you can't, because you're stuck on it, and it gets close to impossible in these later stages, and you usually lose more lives just trying to get them, so forget about it. Anyway, you get to the end of World 4 after some of the hardest levels and barely any supplies, only to then begin the final boss of that world, Space Mama. Let's safely assume you die on your first attempt because it's so confusing for a first-timer, as you'll come to understand, so you restart with the default 3 hit points. Now let's go down the list on why this fight is a load of shit. It begins immediately with a flying thing that you need to duck under. If you didn't know to do that, 1 hit point gone. Following that, she parks her ass near the center of the stage, giving you no room to hit the only weak spot she has, the very tip top of her head. And sometimes you can hit it okay, and other times you don't, and it just bounces off. It makes no fucking sense. If you can't hit her 3 times or so before she reaches the end of the screen, which is very likely, especially as you're trying to find her weak spot when you're first playing the boss level, you lose another hit point, maybe even die by that point. If you don't die though, you've got 1 hit point left, so luckily her laser gun and flying is easy enough to predict and avoid. But after some time passes, she'll fly to the sky and start firing these pots at you. They're quick to fire at you, but I'd say still possible to avoid if you think on your toes. Then all of a sudden, you get the row section. You get 4 rows that you need to quickly dash to the clear end of the stage with before they fire at you, and on the last one, you can't run because they're too close to the floor, and the only way that you can avoid the last row is by making sure that you run to the edge of the clear part of the last row and then make sure you're immediately facing the opposite direction, and as soon as that last row leaves the screen, you need to crawl the millisecond after they do leave, otherwise it's impossible. Look, how fair is that? And with that, assuming that you didn't die earlier trying to figure out where to hit her in the first place, 3 strikes and you're out. Try again. This time you remembered why you died in the first go, so you're okay, but you might still make a mistake. So let's just say you have 2 hit points left on your second attempt, and then you need to learn another section when you're being randomly fired different length laser blasts at different heights. And no, unlike the part with the pots where you just had to wait for the attack to end before you can hit her again, instead you actually have to hit the fucking washing machine tons of times in order to make it go away. But not the washing machine, the tiny little knob on the top of the washing machine. And again, sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. So assuming that you had any hit points left after figuring out that bullshit, watch out again, because if you manage to pass that point, out of nowhere, the washing machine starts bouncing off towards you. So if you aren't ready for that, you're probably gonna die again. Oh, and for added sprinkles of awful, the same laser attack she's been doing since the beginning now tricks you and suddenly fires twice. Fucking hell, this is one of the worst bosses ever, and I'm not even exaggerating. I fucking hate it. And this footage you're seeing here is me beating her. I can do it just fine with 3 hit points because of how many damn times I've retried it for my Rayman video. And because of that, I can confidently say it's one of the most unfair, trial and error, and mechanically random fights I've ever played, and I have more fun gouging out black goo under my toenails. None of it makes any fucking sense, and it expects so much out of you, especially if you're stuck in a death cycle and constantly retrying with the same pitiful fist attack and 3 hit points, that if you can't do it within the first attempt after a perfect run of the tricky stage before it with the most health and best fist, you might as well just hit reset. Except if you didn't save before this encounter, you'll lose all of your progress if you reset, or if you lose all of your continues on that boss in the first place, you'll have to reset anyway. Fuck! No, enough. I can't take any more awful bosses. That is enough, thank you. What do you think, though? Do you agree with some of my choices? Do you disagree with some of my choices? Do you think I should crawl up into the corner and starve myself to death? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. You might even have some bosses that I might have forgotten about, or that you had experience didn't like and that I didn't include in this video. I don't know, I'm only one person, fucking hell. But until next time, if it's your birthday today or watching this video,